So building up aviation has been a part of my life since a very young age. And like you said, now I'm just about to sit my last module of ATPL exams, and I'm hoping to start my CPL in March. The modular path of pilot training, you really do have to organize a lot yourself. You have to do a lot of research. At the end of the day, the more research you do, the better. Navigating from a map and actually looking out your window and having a look at what's down there instead of looking at what's on your mobile phone. Different subjects have provided their own challenges. I find mathematical subjects more favorable to me. And when I saw the amount of content that arrived at my door, I thought, how do people remember this to a level that scores them 90% plus averages? I thought there is no way this is real.
Hello, everybody. My name's Alex Whittingham, and welcome to our Airhead video chat. Today, I have Cameron Gow with me. Cameron's a modular pilot just finishing his ATPL theory, and it's his experience with the theory exams that we're mainly going to talk about today. Welcome, Cameron.
Good morning.
Morning. Cameron, before we start looking at the main topic, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you start your pilot journey? What motivated you?
Yeah, so growing up, I came from a somewhat aviation family. My father was a private pilot. He had a Piper Arrow when we were growing up. He was able to actually use that aircraft for work, so it was financially viable to have a light aircraft. I spent a little bit of time as a young boy in the aircraft with him, and I still remember those days, even now. He used to fly them. He worked in motorsport, and he used to fly them to racetracks, and he was able to land the aircraft on the start-finish straights of racetracks around the UK because they take hours to drive to, and flying was a lot quicker. That was until the insurance company decided that they weren't too happy about this going on, and they said you cannot land on the start-finish straights of racetracks anymore. So it didn't become financially viable to have a light aircraft. But that was my introduction into aviation through my father. I live around the corner from Brooklands Museum, so I've been there countless times, and it's equally exciting every single time I go there. That was how I got into aviation. But aside from that, I have a big appreciation for mechanics and engineering, cars as well, motorsport. I worked in motorsport to pay for my pilot training. I still do some work in motorsport now. So building up aviation has been a part of my life since a very young age. And then I started my pilot training at 21 years old, when I just about had enough cash sitting in the bank for a PPL. And even then, it ended up being far more expensive than I expected it to be, but that is the reality of pilot training. And like you said, now I'm just about to sit my last module of ATPL exams, and I'm hoping to start my CPL in March.
Cool. Okay, so you evidently chose the modular path rather than the integrated. Are there any issues you met which were, in your view, specific to the modular path?
I think I was slightly warned about this. Before I started any pilot training, I did go and visit all of the schools around the UK. Well, certainly the ones that come up on the first page of Google, a lot of them heavily integrated, and some of them offering modular packages as well. And they did set me a pre-warning. They did say, and I thought this actually was a marketing kind of trick at the start, but they used to say, the modular path of pilot training, you really do have to organize a lot yourself. You have to do a lot of research. And I didn't really understand what they meant by that. And I found that in the end, I did my PPL at my local airfield, and that was great. I could get consistent slots, and I was able to do my PPL in 4.5 months. The first hurdle when I thought about modular training, when it came to modular training, was the hour building. Or first of all, knowing where to go for your hour building, structuring it, not falling into bad habits, because that's 100 hours of potentially unsupervised flying. There's really no need for you to have an instructor for any of those 100 hours. Although in my personal opinion, I think that regular 15, 20, maybe 25-hour intervals with an instructor on reflection is one of the most beneficial things that a modular pilot can do in their hour building. But that is 100 hours is plenty of time to pick up awful habits and to get into some really bad traits because you're just not being seen by an instructor. And that was one of the challenges that I did face going through modular training, is I spent most of my flying as of right now without an instructor, and then going back into training for your commercial pilot's license, for your instrument rating. I think you can end up causing yourself an issue by having to retrain yourself to get rid of poor habits. Part of the modular approach is that you are left on your own a little bit more, and you have to decide where you're going to go for your training. Different places cost different amounts. Different places have their own issues. A lot of places I've seen have scheduling problems. And all of this is stuff that you have to take into account and research. And even now, 2 years down the line from when I first did research into flight school, I'm still learning a lot about where I could have gone, where I could have done other parts of my training in a better way. So there's a lot of constant learning, and a lot of it is unstructured, and you have to structure it yourself.
Wow, yeah. So there's a lot of issues there, aren't there? The questions of which flight schools to go to, for instance, because as you point out, there's a fair bit of marketing around, and it's ultimately it's customer feedback that's going to give you a clue as to which is good and which is bad. But social media being what it is, sometimes you find the organizations swamp the customer feedback, and it's
Oh,
tricky
absolutely.
telling the difference between real and not real. There are some organizations that would help you with some of this. Presumably, when you're doing your hours building, you were doing ground school as well. And a good ground school should help you at least with licensing advice to help you through that particular path, help you with choices of flight schools, because the ground schools are often not financially linked to the flight schools, so they can give comparatively impartial advice, even if it's sort of under the table. And there are organizations, there are not-for-profits like Wings Alliance that offer this sort of support. Did you use any of those resources?
I didn't actually, and on reflection, I wish I had, because it would have, like you said, sort of advice that has no conflict of interest with the flight schools, and the ground school and the flight schools having no conflict of interest. It would have been a great place to get some research, because at the end of the day, the more research you do, the better. Doesn't mean you have to take on every advice that you get given, but you at least get to consider it.
Yeah. Okay.
But having said that, like you said, with the licensing, I mean, I chose to do dual licensing. And the first point that you select that in your training is when you do the ground school and when you sit your exams. That's really the first point that you start to take that path. And Bristol Ground School provided me fantastic advice on the dual licensing and how to go about it, exam centers. And so on that reflection, I wish I had done more research. These non-profit organizations look fantastic, and I'm aware of them now, but I wish I'd used them at a more pivotal time.
Okay. Note to marketing people: increase awareness. So you're going for both licenses. Can you just briefly tell me why you think going for both licenses is an advantage?
Well, the obvious advantage is your increased availability of employment with European operators who don't have G-registered aircraft if you are on a UK CAA only license. I mean, for me, there was another motive. I have a EU passport. I have an Irish passport as well as a British passport. So I have easier access to work and live in Europe. And there's one less barrier for me to take on employment in Europe. But when it actually comes to the exams, a lot of people dread the idea of taking each exam twice when they don't have to. And my genuine personal reflection on all of that and advice is it's nowhere near as bad as it sounds. The exam crossovers from I'm sitting UK CAA and Austro control authorities, and the crossover is easily 90%. So it's almost like taking the exact same exam twice. It's very, very familiar. Okay, you've got to consider the extra exam fees, which will run you another, I guess, £1,000 during your ground school, certainly. But in terms of, is it a hassle? No. And I think it's severely overplayed. And I really do recommend people to consider it beyond the point of taking an exam twice. That shouldn't really be a limiting factor because they are so similar.
Right, yeah. And when you're talking about airlines that want EASA licenses, then for you, obviously, with an Irish passport, you can work in the EU. But for those of us that don't have Irish grandparents, you're presumably talking about Ryanair, who look for EASA licenses for British citizens.
Exactly that. I mean, they're a huge employer of EASA licensed pilots coming straight out of flight school. So with that being said, yeah, that opens up a big market for you. And I do know quite a few people personal that I know have gone to Ryanair and as a result of doing the EASA licensing.
Okay, thanks. So let me loop back to your hours building, because you raised an issue there that I think probably needs to be explored. You said the issue of getting bad habits while you were doing your hours building because it was nearly all solo or all solo. Have you any ideas about how those bad habits could be avoided? Any advice to people about the hours building, things that you could do perhaps to keep yourself on path?
Yeah, so it's exactly what I was able to intercept during my hour building and work out a way to not get into too bad of a habits. One of the easiest bad habits to get into is downloading Skydemon or ForeFlight on your phone and flying like this and forgetting that you even have a VFR chart, forgetting what any sort of mathematical calculations for, crosswind, ground speed, wind components, all of that stuff. And so I found one of the things that came into my mind was essentially because one of the big issues with getting into bad habits is you're going to have to get out of them to go and do your CPL skills test, which is, yes, a step up from the PPL skills test, but fundamentally you're still using VFR charts, and it's a VFR flight training program if you haven't got without the instrument rating. So with that being said, I actually every 25 hours I went and did a PPL skills test, mock PPL skills test with an instructor. So we would do the circuit phase, the navigation phase, and the general handling phase. And I'd just say absolutely any advice you can give me that I can pick up on, because it's so easy to fall out of these habits. Naturally, I don't practice stalling while I'm carrying my buddies around and dotting around the sky. So general handling can slip out the window quite easily. Navigating from a map and actually looking out your window and having a look at what's down there instead of looking at what's on your mobile phone, those sort of skills do slip out quite quickly. And so every 25 hours after the first 25 hours, so three times in my hour birding, I did a full PPL mock skills test just to keep those skills proficient.
Yeah, I get you. Did you consider doing a restricted IR after your PPL to allow you to build up a bit of IFR time?
I did consider it, about a fraction too late. I have one of my good friends started his restricted IR actually. And again, this was one of the cases where even though I did 2 years of research about flight training, I didn't really know much about the restricted IR until I was quite heavy into my hour building. I didn't really know what it was for. I didn't know that you could do the restricted IR route to the full IR, that was actually a financially viable option. And again, this is part of the case of when you go online and you search up flight schools, the first major flight schools that come up on Google, they don't talk about the restricted IR because that's not really the typical way that a lot of people go through their training. However, it's a really sensible and logical way to go about it. So I do know about the restricted IR. It was too late for me, realistically, by the time I'd realized it, but it is a really fantastic way to go about it, because realistically, when you do your restricted IR, you might do them with your same club that you did your PPL at, and you can do them on far cheaper aircraft to run by the hour. And if the numbers work out right, I've seen a few people save themselves a few £1,000s by the time they've gained their full IR by doing the restricted IR route.
Yeah, good ideas. Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks. Well, we actually met because you studied with us at Bristol Ground School, and I think you said you're taking your last set of exams either this week or next week. So tell me, how long did the course take you, and how have you done so far in the ATPL exams?
Yes, the course itself took. I bought the course in October with you, but my issue was I didn't have enough time to settle down for the exams until about December. So my October, November, December was very laxed. I didn't get much content done. It was very slow progress. And then from December, I was able to get a lot of work done. And I took my first exams in March. So my reflection on 3 months to do a module was, I think, a very realistic set, but of course it depends on your work-life balance. How much time do you have to dedicate to these exams? I do work a full-time job and I do just study around it. Realistically, some people I know have taken up to 6 months to do modules. Some people have taken 2 months to do modules. So I started my first exams in March. I then did my second module in June, and I'm now looking to do my final module in just a couple of weeks in November. So from first exam to last exam, 8 months. But with the studying for the first module of exams, we're looking at about 10 to 11 months. And I think that was pretty much the goal that I set myself at the start, was to go through it in 12 months with the job that I'm working, only being able to study part-time. And so far, so it's been going great. I've been, the course itself has been fantastic. The support has been amazing from Bristol. Anytime I've had concerns over the exams, over the content, I've always had someone to contact. My running averages at the moment before the module 3 is my UK average is 91.5% with a first time pass rate on all the exams, and my EASA average is 94% with a first time pass on every exam. So at the moment, things are going fantastic. Different subjects have provided their own challenges. I find mathematical subjects more favorable to me. Certain subjects I didn't like, and it's completely opposite to the next person. Subjects that I enjoyed, they hated, and some subjects that I really hate, they enjoyed. So you can't be great at every single topic, is what I found. And module 3 still presents its own issues. It's a very mathematical module for Bristol Ground School's module 3, but hopefully I'll be able to keep my averages to where I want them to be.
Yeah, everyone's different. What is common, I've found, is that most people regard these as quite an intimidating set of exams. And many people haven't done this sort of study since they were at school, and possibly not even when they were at school. So when they start, they perceive a set of challenges, which may not be a correct perception. And then by the time they get onto the second and third module, they are developing a different view about how to study and stuff like that. So when you started, and we're talking now about Christmas last year, or perhaps the autumn of last year, what did you think were going to be the main challenges facing you?
So starting off, if I look back to my educational history, I was no genius in school. My GCSEs were very average. My A-levels were very, very average. There was nothing special in my educational history. So I thought presenting the same challenges, I was going to have issues with revision, just remembering the content. I hadn't started at this time, I hadn't started the question banks, so I didn't know how similar the exams would be to the question banks. And it's one thing for people to tell you, oh, these question banks are really similar to the exams, but how much do you believe them? I chose, I don't know. I haven't sat the exam yet. So I was a bit concerned with how well I was going to be able to remember all the content in the book. And I ordered the printed out manuals from Bristol Ground School. And when they arrived at my door, as you'll know, Alex, they're about this tall once they stack on top of each other. And there is just so many pages of content. And when I saw the amount of content that arrived at my door, I thought, how do people remember this to a level that scores them 90% plus averages? I thought there is no way this is real. So that my biggest concern was just the amount of content. It was absolutely insane. And I think a lot of people say that as well, that the amount of content in ATPLs is very heavy. After the module 1, I then realized that the question banks are an unbelievably vital tool. The fact that they're based on feedback really works because they're just full of exact questions that people see in the real exams. And I actually, coming out of my first module of exams, I'd seen about 90% of the questions in my real exam from the question bank, and it almost felt like cheating. To be quite honest, it felt like this was too good to be true. So my perception before the exams of am I going to have to really remember the whole book was somewhat incorrect, because the way the book knowledge translates into exam questions is actually quite strange. When you first hit the question banks, your knowledge that you've got from the books, I find, doesn't translate very well. I think you have to the question banks really adjust you for the exams. And I think even if you could hypothetically learn every single word in an equation and number in the book, I think you'd still really struggle in your exams. I think the question banks translate that knowledge really well for the exams.
So let me ask the question in a flip format then. Having done the question banks, do you think that helps you with your perspective and understanding of the learning material that you'd worked through? Do you think it reinforced what you'd learned, or do you think it was something completely separate and nothing to do with what you've learned?
So the way I've been thinking about this myself for quite a long time, actually, the way I really think about it is the question banks contain everything from the books that you've learned, but it's the way it might connect. You might learn piece of knowledge X and piece of knowledge Y in a subject, and you might get a question bank question that needs a bit of knowledge from both of those. And you can't do that. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know you expect to be able to join these pieces of knowledge and make these links through what you've learned in the book until you go to the question banks. So I really think they just adapt what you have learned to the questions, because as soon as you start hitting the question banks, in every single module that I've done, the questions come across as very foreign when I look at them straight away as I'm finishing the content, getting into the question banks. So the question banks just adjust everything you've learned. And on reflection, all I would say to myself is I wish I'd done more questions.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Now, when we were talking about this interview before we started, you mentioned that it was important to connect with as many other students as possible. Do you just want to expand on that, please?
Yes. So again, being a modular student and a distance learning student does present its own challenges on you are very isolated. And a lot of the friends I talk to who are in a classroom environment for ATPLs, they can just talk to other classmates. You can come out of a session. Someone might understand something, someone might not understand something. You can discuss, you can have talks about it all. And that is something that you just really, really lack as a distance learning student in any world, in any education. That's just a characteristic of it. So that being said, I didn't really have people to talk to and say, do you find this bit tricky, or how did you find this in the exam, or how was your exam? I'm just about to sit that exam in 2 weeks. I'd like to know how you came out. So that, I think, is actually one of the biggest barriers to distance learning ATPLs, is that you've got great support from the school, but having an environment of students around you is really awesome. And missing out on that is quite tough. And to fix that, I run an Instagram account like a lot of people in aviation do these days. And I put out an offer onto one of my stories saying, look, if you're about to take some exams, taking some exams, or have already taken some exams and want to provide help to other people, let's make a group chat on WhatsApp. Let's get people together. I initially thought it might get, 10, 12 people in it. We've now got 80 participants in it from 17 different countries at the moment. And it's absolutely buzzing. It's fantastic. People can ask questions left, right, and center, different exam authorities. Some people have finished their exams and are helping other people, so people that haven't taken any exams yet. And that was one of the best things I did during my training, is I put myself out there to connect not just myself with other people, but other people with other people as well. And it's created an amazing body of a network of people to get some advice from.
That's brilliant. Well, you've been through some of the challenges and you've talked about some of your study techniques, and we're going to continue that. But before we do that, if I can just talk directly to the viewers, if you find this interesting, please would you click the thumbs up button below and follow us. And this will help us produce more video chats to help you on your journey. Thanks for your support. Thank you for tuning in to the first part of our interview with Cameron. In the next video, we'll dive into Cameron's suggested study techniques for modular pilot training, how he tackles the stress and anxiety that often accompanies exams, and the pivotal role that question banks play in his preparation. Learn about his effective use of question banks and the advantages of having access to multiple banks through platforms like Airhead. Whether you're a student pilot or simply intrigued by aviation, you won't want to miss this enlightening conversation. Stay with us. I
basically rewrote into my own words every single lesson in module 1, and immediately presented one issue is it took me forever to get through some of the lessons. For me personally, I found that note-taking slowed me down a lot, and the notes that I did take, I never looked back on. Question bank. You've got to do a lot of questions before you go into the exam. Visual learning for me is important. I mean, there's plenty of pictures and stuff, but videos are fantastic. And that leads me on to saying that YouTube is an unbelievable tool for learning anything these days. So having all the questions in one place was exactly what I needed.